Hi writers, the purpose of this video is to review synthesis and how to synthesize sources within your paragraphs. So your outline might look something like this. General outline, you've got a research question, you have a thesis, which is your answer to that research question, and then you have some main points. So we're thinking about moving from that outline into paragraphing, fleshing out these ideas with our own explanation, our own quotations from sources, our own ideas. As we do that, please remember what makes a paragraph robust, especially in a research-based paper. So each paragraph we know is focused on one main specific idea that helps answer your research question. And then after that main idea, we support the main idea with multiple pieces of evidence and multiple types of evidence. And when we are synthesizing sources, multiple sources of evidence. So keep in mind that readers are never really convinced by one source, never really convinced by one statistic. So in a really good research paper, we synthesize. This means, as I've said a few times, that if you have a paragraph that does only have one source or one piece of information or evidence, that's generally just a sign that you need to try to find some other sources that relate to that same idea. In doing that, you might find different perspectives, you might find supporting perspectives, and that just makes your understanding of the source and the understanding that you can create for your readers even richer. I provided some video lessons last week or this week that also review paragraph structure. So this is going to be really helpful in turning that outline into a paper. We start with the main idea. Then we pull in evidence from sources. We analyze, discuss, draw connections between those sources in our own words. And then we link back to the overall topic. So this is a great opportunity to pause and kind of read through this paragraph structure. This is also something I really recommend having out on your desk as you are working on developing your paper. I want to remind you as well that the textbook has a reading on synthesis that has been assigned, and that will really help cement your understanding of what it means to synthesize. So in a synthesis, we combine summary, paraphrase, and quotations from several sources with our own ideas to support an original conclusion. So a couple important things here is that sometimes it's sort of a discussion of how sources are working together. We also use transitional words and phrases to identify points of similarity or points of differences. So we always identify the sources and we kind of talk about how the sources are working together. The textbook also has some examples of effective and ineffective synthesis paragraphs, and those are important to notice too. So synthesizing means building a relationship between different ideas and different sources. We bring together information from multiple sources in a meaningful way to show the connection between ideas and come to new, more intriguing insights. I like to think of synthesis as a conversation that you are facilitating within your paper. I like to use metaphors like synthesis is kind of like a book club where you're inviting all these different books into your paper, or it's like a dinner party where you're inviting people who will have interesting perspectives to share. The people you're inviting are your sources, your source authors and their ideas. You can also think of synthesis as creative sort of problem solving. The issues that you choose to write about, people are already discussing. You want to invite those voices into your paper to help you have a richer discussion. So a synthesis paragraph structure will look like this. We have the main idea, we pull in evidence. We always discuss the significance of that evidence. Of course, we're doing that source sandwiching here. Then we transition to a new source. We provide evidence and analysis of that source, and then we link it all together and back to the thesis. Synthesis connectors come in, those transitions to new sources. So it might be something like source A writes this, source B agrees about this and writes this. So those synthesis connectors here, source B agrees, source B provides further evidence for this idea, come in to connect the sources. So here's an example of an effective synthesis paragraph. It's color-coded, so we have a clear statement claim, that's the M of the meal plan paragraph. We pull in evidence, that's the E. We introduce each source as we pull it in, and then we explain those sources. Then at the end, we always tie back to the thesis. I also want you to pay attention to the transitional phrases or synthesis connectors between sources that help the reader understand how the ideas are connected. So here's an example of a synthesis paragraph. In red, here we have the main point. In yellow, we have introduction of sources. So you can see here, in fact, in a survey conducted by Smith, an editor of the Sociology Compass Journal, that's a really nice source setup because we have the author. We also have their credentials here. And then we transition into the actual quotation in green. Please notice underlined then, we transition into the next idea. And then, for example, underlined transitions into the next source. So you can see there we have synthesis connectors. A really nice synthesis connector introduces yet the next source, providing more evidence of increased crime. So this is a really good synthesis connector because it tells us what this next piece of evidence adds to the conversation that we're already facilitating in our paragraph. You can see here the in-text citations. This one cites Treatment Advocacy Center. So in this case, we're using an organization as an author. This one, the author's name is already used in the signal phrase, so we don't include the citation here. So you can take a look at that as well. Great opportunity to pause and read through this example of what a synthesis paragraph looks like. When we think about effective synthesis, the starting place is some paragraphs will have more than one source in them. That's just the mark of a good research paper. Some paragraphs will have more than one source in them, but that's not all. They also need to make the relationship between those sources apparent. Synthesis is not just a series of summaries of different sources. Instead, those sources are pulled in to help you discuss your ideas. And again, your job is to facilitate that conversation. You have to explain how these sources are working together to create a deeper understanding. It's not just comparing or contrasting either. Again, that explanation work that you do is really important. Here's an example of ineffective synthesis. So take a look at this and see if you can think, what is it missing or how could it be improved? We pull in Nicole Kidman here. We have a really nice introduction to that quote. We know who the author is. We know what the text is that it came from. We have rights as the signal phrase, and then comma quote. We have a nice citation at the end. After that quote, we go to the next one. In his article, Chocolate Tastes as Good as Halle Berry's Tonsils, Adrian Brody states, chocolate is important to American life. So here, what are we missing? In this case, it's not really synthesis because there's no synthesis connector in the middle. It has two sources. That's a really good start. But remember, it's not just smooshing two sources up against each other. Instead, we have to include transitions that show how those sources' ideas are connected to each other. In this case, you could do something like, Adrian Brody provides further evidence. Here's another ineffective example. See if you can identify how this could be improved. In Karen Crago's article, Milton Hershey should be canonized, Lisa Simpson states, I love chocolate. Waylon Smithers agrees with this sentiment, stating, chocolate is the greatest discovery humankind can claim. We do have a synthesis connector. Waylon Smithers agrees with this sentiment. However, Lisa Simpson said, I love chocolate. And we have Waylon Smithers agrees with this sentiment, stating, chocolate is the greatest discovery humankind can claim. In this case, the connection between the two is not really logical. Simpson says, I love chocolate. Smithers isn't agreeing that she loves chocolate or that he loves chocolate. He's actually making a completely different point. So the synthesis connector in this case is just a little bit illogical. Make sure the connection that you're drawing between sources is accurate and makes sense. Here's an example of how we can improve that synthesis connector. Something like Smithers also expresses appreciation for chocolate, but focuses on the global impact. He says chocolate is the greatest discovery. So remember, this one, sort of slow down, take your time in explaining how these sources are communicating with each other at the dinner party of your paper. So in order to include multiple sources, first, think about the goal of the paragraph. Is it to provide information to the reader, to develop support for a claim? Is it a counter argument? And then here are different ideas for how and why it's a good idea to include multiple sources in paragraphs that do different types of things. Good opportunity to pause and read through the information here. I have posted some other synthesis information on Brightspace, so make sure to take a look at the meal plan videos. One of them includes a meal plan with synthesis too. And as you're taking a look at your outline, remember to go back to your outline. I would recommend copying and pasting your outline in your paper, your outline of section 2 at least. Your outline probably looks something like this over here on the right. And now it's time to flesh this out. So to turn this into a meal plan paragraph, we have our topic sentence. Sometimes it's helpful to explain what we mean by that. We're going to then transition into our first source and begin our source sandwich. Provide context for that source, introduce the source, use a signal phrase, pull in the quotation, cite it, and then transition into the next source using a synthesis connector.